Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Write Your Family History. If this is your first time here, I would love for you to drop that in the chat or in the comments. My name is Devin Noelle, and I love to help you quickly write your family histories in a way that makes it easy and fun, and you actually capture all of those memories. This is Shane from Australia. His submission was actually really cool. Shane had written in, and I hope I'm saying that right. It looks like Shane. If it's something else, just kind of phonetically spell it to me, okay? Shane had said, hey, what about this really cool source where William James Castle was interviewed, and it said by Don White, and later it said somewhere there was a discussion that said it was his son-in-law. And then I saw a John as a son, so that's a little bit confusing, but regardless, there was this, and Shane, feel free to correct any part of the story that I get wrong. But from the email, he said Shane was working on his second great uncle's story, the one we're going to talk about here in a moment, and he stumbled across a prompt where a relative of this William James Castle was trying to get a hold of people who were related to Larry Breasley, because in this interview, William, his comrade, remembers how Leslie died. And the relative of Williams just wanted to bring this to the attention of Shane's. And glad to know I'm getting the names right. But I do have to forewarn you, I got confused while I was writing this, whether it was Larry or Leslie that I was writing about. So Shane's going to have to do a little bit of editing work later. But it was really cool to see this audio cassette recording now digitized and on this Australian War Memorial page. And then it was brought to Shane's attention so that he can then, on his ancestry profile somewhere, is the interview, the William James Castle interview that he's now tagged to that so future people can know about this. So it was really nice. Okay. Now, the cassette recording that's now an audio file for someone who is hearing impaired, it was really difficult to read. So I did hear. So I did leverage some transcription technology. And that's our first step whenever we have some type of source, we have to transcribe it. Now, we're not going to spend any time necessarily on the tools to use to transcribe audio files. The only thing I will tell you is that this particular file was 25 minutes. There are a number of services that will transcribe a file from audio file to text. You can have it as a text document or a Word document or whatever, and the free limit is like 5 minutes. So in order to transcribe the whole thing, then you would need to chop it up into 5-minute increments using an audio editing file. Or you would then have to pay for the entire file to be processed. Now, within the audio clip, it actually had two stories. One about William Castle's service in the military, and the other section was the Great Depression. But Leslie, I'm going to use Larry more often than the name Leslie because he actually went by two names here. Leslie and Larry, and I got confused while I was writing, even though it was staring me at the face. I'm now going, after the fact, that I kept calling him Larry in the article. But he did go by Larry as a nickname, so maybe Shane can give us some insight about that. But back to the topic of the transcription part, Larry was only in William's war memory section. So another thing you could do is just chop off, somehow use an audio editing file to just get out that segment, then process it through an audio transcriber, and then you have it ready to go. In the future, we can talk about some tools to do that. The way I went around it, I wouldn't recommend. It was a pain in the keister. And I'm really glad to know, okay, Leslie is the birth name, Larry is the nickname. Everyone called him Larry. So me calling him Larry more often than Leslie, but again, when we get to it, when they actually fix it, we'll have to do it at the end because I have it queued up. But if you are confused over the name, Shane will figure it out in the end, and I do apologize that. But that is the beauty of drafting. You will go through and you will write and you will say, oh my gosh, how did I mess that up? You draft however you get it drafted, then you go and edit and revise. And during the revision phase, that's when you go, oh, shoot. I implied that the birth name was Larry and the nickname was Leslie. I got it reversed. So in the drafting phase or in a beta reading phase or sharing with your family phrase before you publish it, somebody can catch it and then you could fix it. So we don't mind mistakes around here. Okay. So after I got the transcription of the interview or a portion of the interview, the next step is to rearrange what we had. And so I do have that available. And we'll go to it right now. There we go. All right. So this was the section about the story for Larry. We're going to call him Larry. And William just said something very briefly. And another chap, Larry Breasley, even took it further along the trench. And they came around looking for Leslie, as they call him, for Larry Breasley. Now, what you're going to notice is that two things are happening with William's recollections. He's speaking as he remembers. So the sentence structure isn't very good. However, this is an audio transcription, an automatic audio transcription of the voice. And so there might actually be some words that William actually included that would make this story make more sense. But because of the sound distortion of the tape, or just because the technology to transcribe the audio didn't pick up some of the words, it can be a little more confusing than William initially said. So I would recommend whenever you get a transcription, particularly a computer-generated transcription of an audio file, go back and replay it again and make sure you captured it all. However, I did get a sense of what was being said, and if you are too, let me know. So apparently, William went to school with Larry. I called for volunteers with Larry Breasley. He jumped up on top to go along looking for the dead and dying out in the meow. Now, I know that has to be a word that was misheard by the computer-generated tool. Then they dropped him. They caught him right on top of the trench. A sniper got him out in somewhere. He died. We had to bury him in the trench. Poor old Larry Breasley. I wrote and told his people about it, and they published a letter in the local paper by the advertiser, Larry Breasley. So that's what we have. Just a little bit of segments within this audio file that is now on the Australian War Memorial page for people to hear. You totally can go check things out over there. So when we take that, we're going to rearrange some of the story so it makes sense. What I did actually do was capture a little more detail that William had shared, because I'm not entirely sure just yet where we're going to insert some of the stories that he shared. But because William and Larry were in the same unit together, I feel like eventually this could be something worthwhile to add. So there was something about there's a lot of camps along Boulogne. That's how it was interpreted. You guys can put your thoughts of where this might have been in France, because I don't think that's the actual correct name. There's different camps. He talks about a Rhode Island shelter. There were some vivid things are called the Jeeps, but I'm pretty sure I know where that is in Belgium and have a correction later. He talks about the German bombing and how they called them wagoners, the big shells. He talked about the first stage going down to the sheds. There are a couple of different stories that precede this story about Larry that I believe the two men were in the same unit. So maybe we'll put that into the story. So I haven't really rearranged it. I just chopped things up and put it in one file rather than the transcribed file. Okay, so some guesses on the meow. It could be meadow. We'll just keep that in the back of their mind. It could be. There was a suggestion. June had one about when you're on Ancestry, where to place nicknames. It's a good tip. If you agree or disagree, share your thoughts in the comments. And then June thinks that the balloon is this place in France, which I'm not going to attempt to butcher. Entirely possible as well. Now, here's the question of the day. Let's get some feedback. So we've got some of these words that don't make any sense. Because maybe it's misheard by the audio transcription, or maybe the way somebody says something like Jeeps. Well, that's how it sounds, but it has a different spelling in a foreign country's way of spelling their location. And then we have some different landing points. Where do we go to try to make sense of places in our ancestor stories? So that's my challenge. Where would you go to try to find information about places in your ancestor stories? Now, this one is about a World War I battle, and it involves the Australian and New Zealand ANZAC. I wrote it down, ANZAC. Australian and New Zealand, I forget the rest. Corps. I remember it. And yeah, there's another A in there. Okay, here's more homework. ANZAC. Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. I'm going to have to look it up again. It's going to come up and we're going to remember it. But anyway, this is a story, World War I, the ANZAC groups. How would you go about finding, or Army Corps? I had it. Yay! Thanks so much. Where would you go to figure out the locations in your story? If you have any ideas, let us know. But that's when you start marking things up. I'm going to recommend when you have a story like this, you're going to mark it up. Where was Balloon? And I put it in parentheses because, again, this is the computer transcription of the file. I've got the Jeeps. I don't believe that is the correct spelling. This first stage is mentioned. We also have the trenches. On top of the trenches, where were the trenches? What day? There's no date in this story. We need to have a date. And I also want to know a little bit more about Larry, and I want to know a little bit more about William. So that's part of the marking up. And the other thing that should stand out to you, let me slide this over so you can see, is that I want to track down this newspaper and see what was printed about William writing home to the survivors of Larry. All right, so no one has any thoughts on where to go to figure out places. So I'll give you some thoughts and maybe that'll trigger some thoughts for you. So I am personally working on a Civil War project. I'm researching the 900 men in the Ohio 133rd Regiment in the Civil War. And I'm mostly focused on Company K, but I do want to know what's going on with the rest of the companies. So there are two sources that I really, really love that help me understand a little bit about the war history. So there is There's actually a lot of histories. There's unit histories. There was one written by someone in the 133rd. His name was Sylvester Sherman. Really appreciated his quasi firsthand account with some alternate sources that he put in. So that was his unit history. But there are also some websites, particularly the Soldiers and Sailors database, and the Ancestry actually has that. It has the American, I forget what it's called right now, but there I've seen it come up a number of times. It'll have information about the regiment and where it served, where it enlisted, where it mustered out, different campaigns they were, and you can kind of follow along for that. So it's kind of the snapshot version of the big unit history. Oh, this is a good one. Look for diaries by leaders of the regiment. Ooh, that's a really, really good hint. So if you can find diaries, because just because your ancestor either didn't create it or he's may not be directly named in a diary, they went along on the same basic journey, and you can understand what did they when they went from one point to another. Did they walk? Did they go by wagon? Did they go by train? Did they go by ship? How long did it take? What were the living conditions? And so on and so forth. um, State histories that have a military information is another great resource, so keep those ideas coming. For me, when all else fail, I do Google searches. So I did a lot of Google searches and I was able to improve Larry's story here. Okay, so step 2 was rearrange. And now we're going to go ahead and look at some of the rearrangement that I did. Share the screen again. There we go. All right. So, as many of you longtime viewers know, I love putting days of weeks when I have events. So now I have on Thursday, the 20th of September, 1917, an Australian soldier died trying to recover his fallen comrades in the trenches near. See that word right there? I'm not going to even try to say it, but I can understand why people think it sounds like Jeeps with somebody with that voice recording um, in America, and they're not entirely sure what how to say that name, or they say it a different way. So if you have an idea of how to say it. So what do I always say when you don't know how to say something? Well, we need to have a pronunciation guide at some point. Pronunciation guide. I love having spell check on my computer. So we have a comment that we need to add a pronunciation guide at some point. Okay. I didn't dive too deeply into all the sources that Shane provided me. So at this time, I don't remember what his rank is. When we get to the end, we can always insert that back into the story. So I'm assuming the private, we'll just say Larry Leslie Breasley. And remember, we have to flip that around. It's Larry Breasley volunteered to help remove the bodies of the injured and killed men after what became the first day of the Battle of Mine Road, also known as the third battle of this Belgium location. According to William Castle, a schoolmate to his unit, Leslie jumped atop the trenches looking for the dead in that meadow. And again, we want to figure out where the meow is. Unfortunately for Leslie, a sniper from the enemy forces caught him while he was on top of the trench. You see how I've rearranged the memory. I've added in dates and locations. And now this story is starting to make sense. A sniper from the enemy forces caught him while he was on top of the trench. He fell, and when William and other survivors of the day's battle buried him in the trench. Private Castle later wrote a note to Larry's family, who lived in another location that I don't know how to pronounce. So again, whenever you come across things you don't know how to pronounce, or you do not believe other people would know how to pronounce, I mean, the number of people who can't say places in Texas, having heard them butcher locations in Texas, I will always have a pronunciation guide. So that would be another one that I would recommend putting a pronunciation guide for. Expressing his condolences on, I should have put a day of the week on this. I do apologize. But that's what revising is for. On January 8th, 1918, in the name of a newspaper, in the future, I will probably have to italicize that. This was the following notice, and I went and looked up the notice thanks to Shane's research. So this is what was said. I copied it in. And then at that's supposed to say age of 22, Larry enlisted in, I need to put the unit information and rank. That I put in the date and place. He was a laborer by date. All of this information is coming from records that Shane had pulled together and just put on the timeline, which makes me, I forgot to show you earlier, I had created a timeline with some information. Let me go see if I can find it real quick. I gathered all of this information in preparation of writing Larry's story after I knew I marked things up. Oh, here it is. I found it. So I needed to know what unit did they serve in. I have a timeline for Leslie, my first character in the story. This is mainly coming from the research Shane had already previously done. So good job, Shane. We've got the date he enlisted. He has an embarkation on a ship and then a disembarkment in Davenport, England. We have a training in Larkhill and then caught AWOL 10 days in March. Okay. Now we're learning a little bit about Leslie. Why was he AWOL? Unfortunately, I don't remember. Yes, there wasn't a source, so I wasn't able to figure out why he was going AWOL, but I thought it was still pretty interesting. He's going AWOL, taken on strength. I don't know what that means. So if anybody knows, thanks, P. Smith. I just saw a comment of yours. Taken on strength. I don't know what that means, but he's taken on strength. And there's another notation here. He's court-martialed for disobeying a command, and then he's killed in action in the first day. Then I went in search of a timeline for William Castle. When you have a story like this, I would highly recommend you research a little bit about William because there might be that overlap. He's part of the fan club. He at least knew about the death of Larry and took the action of writing home. So this is a family friend I would highly recommend researching. However, on Ancestry, I didn't see a public profile that had very much. I don't think I even found a public profile of William James Castle on Ancestry. I went over to Family Search and it had a very shallowly research. Is that correct to say? The research was pretty shallow for William, not to the depth that Shane had and others have done for Larry. So I wasn't really able to get a lot, but at some point I would highly recommend that Shane in the future create a timeline, do a little bit of research on this William James and see different points of overlap, particularly when he said they were schoolmates, because I don't understand Australian military training. In America, is it that they were boot camp comrades? They met during boot camp before training and then going off to the war? Or did they really go to school together before the war happened? I'm not sure, but you would want to research William and Larry and see the overlaps to then resolve that question. Okay. Again, I showed you that I got the transcript from the newspaper, and that brought me to this point where I was doing the information. And so then I started getting the details about the ship. Because in the timeline, it talked about him leaving Sydney and going on this ship and then traveling to Devonport. So that naturally, I just went and did a search for the ship, and I believe it's number 3. And I found a Bertzwaltz. I'm butchering that. This website, and it talked about the ship that served in the military. Gave me a little bit of details about the length and the beam and the depth. It talked to me about, even though this is a little bit of history that you want to consider. Even though the date is 1915 and this is not when Larry's traveling, it can help you paint a picture of the potential threats Larry and William are going to be encountered or concerned about as they're traveling from Australia to England. So I went ahead and snagged this. Now, when I snagged it, I just kind of copied this paragraph as is, didn't do a lot of rewriting because that would come later. I just copied it, put it into the document, put it in quotes, and then gave it just the link, like you see here, to come back later and to do the source citations, the complete source citations. Okie dokie. We got a couple comments here that I want to bring in. The location that we're talking about is something like Ypres, but the Australian troops called it Ypres. Am I saying that right? Because when I see that and I think foreign language, I see vipers because, you know, a German does a W as a V. So I'm guessing it's wipers. And then somehow it became Jeeps in the audio transcription. That's kind of funny. In France, there's remember, we're trying to figure out meow. This is a very good guess. The way we would figure out if this is accurate or not is we would put it on a map, and then we would put it on the regimental history map and see if there's any overlap. But I think that's a valid guess. We'll all have to do the research and try to see if that's correct or not. June had a thought. Taken on strength is a British and British Commonwealth term referring to a person being added to a military organization, or in some cases, becoming an employee of a government department, agency, or statutory corporation. For an aircraft or a vessel, it is a date put on the operation of service. Woohoo! This is why we come to the writing challenges, because others will know things that you do not know. So thank you so much. If I didn't know that, I'm guessing, June, how did you know that? Did you do a Google search, or have you just been very familiar with British military terminology and you had that? So let us all know how we could figure out what that taken on strength means. Shane inserts, oh, she Googled it. Good job. Shane says they were at school in different years, so William knew the family. Fantastic. And then Shane confirms, because he has researched Larry. When you don't know somebody, it's kind of hard to write about them, but you can. But when you know them and you've researched them, it does show that you can validate some of the information we're sharing in this live stream. All right, so let's get back to what's going on. So I researched this ship, and I found that one great wiki. It's a wiki. It's not Wikipedia, and it's not the Family Search Wiki. It's a different wiki. There's lots of wikis floating around. Now, one thing I did is I temporarily put a picture of this ship in my working document. Now, many of you are going to say, well, can you use images? Well, I'm temporarily putting it there, and then I can go back because I want to remember there was a picture of the ship. And then we can go back and research the copyright information or the fair use laws. But this is in Australia. This is an Australian ship, probably photographed under the laws governing Australia photographs and media and copyright. So then I would definitely need to research Australian copyright and fair use laws. So temporarily, I have it here. And then if it's clear under fair use or copyright law in Australia and I can use it, then I can caption it. But if I forget to put it here temporarily, then I'm going to forget that the image is there. Now, some of you may say, well, I could just put a little note that, hey, there's a picture of the ship, research it. That's another way. I'm a little more visual. And so that's why I did that. Okie dokie. So this is right here. You can see where actually I did rewrite that one segment 9 months before Larry's journey aboard the Benalla. Again, we'd probably want to get a pronunciation guide going for there. Was in a surface fight with a German submarine while providing support, and I go ahead and I actually rewrote it. The next thing I did is I saw that there was in the timeline going to the training center. So Google, since I don't know anything about this training center, the training center during World War I in this location. Those were the terms I used. And I was able to find a couple of really great resources. First is this Wartime Memories project that many people can contribute to. And it just gave me a brief. One thing I don't like about this particular website is I can't highlight text so I can show you where things are. It also means I can't necessarily copy any of the text to say, hey, in quotes, I want to come back. This is the information. So I basically can't take digital notes and make digital note cards and then go and figure out how to write in such a way so that I'm not plagiarizing. I actually had to type everything up, and it was a little bit frustrating. However, I did get a bit of information about the Lark Hill camp. I did a little more research and I came across this really cool website. And I did link this for Shane in the document so he can go through it as well. It talked about the camp. And if you scroll down even further, it talks about excavations revealed a large array of World War I practice trenches. So it really was a training camp with practice trenches. I found that interesting, not being a military person myself. I mean, it makes sense that they would practice, but the fact that they had practice trenches is really cool. So I wanted to include that. A couple other things that I thought were interesting was talking about how there was some chalk plaques inscribed with the names of Australian bombers. Ding, ding, ding. This is in England. The Australian troops are coming up to train. That's kind of cool. There were also some different standard issues eating and drinking equipment found. How you might want to work those into your future story, I'm not entirely sure, but I was excited to find this information and maybe at some point work it in. So you never know what you're going to find when you start Googling your story, the different facts within the stories. Thanks so much. Larry is buried in the Ypres Memorial in Cemetery in Belgium. Now, Shane, I thought I read that there was a cross buried with him in the trench, but later they don't really know where the body's found, and perhaps this cemetery just has a memorial to him. I would love you to at this time talk it out in the chat and let me know, because that's something I had a question about. So thanks for saying that, Mr. Smith. Okay. Continuing on, notice how as I'm just going through this, I'm adding lots of details, working through the timeline. So now we've got this court-martial, and there is a source, I believe, for the court-martialing. There's a media for it. I'm not sure which of these may actually talk about the court-martialing. So in that segment, I would want to go back, do some more research, and figure out, why was he AWOL for 10 days? And then later, why was he court-martialed? Now, the next website I found was really awesome. I enjoyed it so much. So this website, this is when I learned about the ANZAC acronym. So this is the ANZAC portal on the Australian Government of Department of Veterans Affairs. So another place to research your ancestors if they're involved in military conflicts is to go to the military or Department of Veteran Affairs websites for the country in which they served and then see if they have unit history. Remember, you don't just search for information about the person specifically, but you do want to try to understand the conflicts that they were engaged in and the units they were a part of. So this was a fantastic, fantastic website. And on it, it had the third Battle of Ypres. That's what I'm going with. From the 30th of July to November, but Larry didn't live that long. Larry died in September. The other thing is that where was he was had a court-martialed for disobeying a lawful command. He serves 30 days. I don't know what he serves 30 days of, but the one thing I'm pointing out now, let me close a couple of these tabs, is notice this third battle starts in July, and he has this court-martialing on the 20th of July, so he might miss a little bit of the opening action in that July timeframe. So can we include what's happening while he's doing whatever service he's doing and the unit might be off doing something else? Absolutely. We need to take you on the journey from Australia to his training to France and the Belgium area and the border with Germany or German occupied territory. And we can say let's say he's in jail. Well, what's happening with his unit while he's in jail? What is he going into when he joins up? Because he has to have joined up again in order to have died where he died. So I would make the judgment that, yes, it's okay to go ahead and keep talking about what's happening at this campaign beginning on the 31st of July and then bring him into the story when it is appropriate. So remember in the story, it talked about the battle, or at least in that timeline, the Battle of Mine Road. So I'm going to jump down here. And what I love about this website are these maps. They are fantastic. The maps and the captioning talking about they were here. And then the Australian and New Zealand corps is down here. The British 10th, 5th, 18th and the French 1st are up here, and their enemy lines are here. They're going to be pushing forward. And this is that area right there. This is the area in which it's being targeted on the 20th of September. And so this is likely where the battle is taking place. And then afterwards, when Larry and William are trying to recover bodies and the injured, this is where he's going to be going in order to recover it. And then he gets up on the top of the trenches and then he gets killed by the sniper. Okay. I love also, there's so much detail on this website. This is a picture that happens a month later about the artillery action. Could you use this picture? Again, it depends on copyright law, but maybe you can incorporate it into the story if you decide after the death of Larry to say what happened to the unit and when they came home. All right. But there were some really cool things. In the transcript, William talked about pig boxes. That's what the computer thought he said. I'm pretty sure he was talking about pill boxes. Now that I noticed that they're talking about pill boxes and what they were, now I can incorporate some of that other into the story. What else? Oh, where's the really cool section I loved? Let's see. Hold. Okay. I like this website because it is telling me that there was this British general, Viscount Herbert Plummer, and he was noticing that there was this problem when the troops would, the infantry in which Larry and William served in, would get ahead of the heavy artillery. They would gain ground but quickly lose ground, and it just wasn't a good strategy. So Larry was part of this new strategy that began on the 20th called bite and hold. And then it went on to describe the bite and hold tactics. And in fact, Larry died on that first date of the bite and hold. He would have been part of the hold had he not been shot by the sniper coming off that trench. There was going to be a 5-day pause, and then so you see what he's missing out on because he passed away, but William had to go through was he's riding home to the family. The 4th and 5th Australian came in and took over the 1st and 2nd, so they were able to pull back. The other thing I really loved about this particular website, where is it? I have to do a search for a specific number. There it is. He said, or the writer or the group of writers talked about how the Australian and New Zealand Air Corps had 513 casualties. Now, if Larry hadn't been attacked by the sniper while he was trying to recover the dead and dying, it might have just only been 512. I just, that number just hit me hard. And then when you compare it to the reported 4,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or captured by the Germans, you wonder, was this an effective strategy for this bite and hold? And just how many men are lost during these battles? So go out and start searching for your battles by name. You will be surprised what you found. And yes, Shane, it is a very, very great website. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So what I did is I took these digital notes here and I just said, so back since his court-martial, his battle was involved in British attacks during and explained, and I have the map temporarily. I went and copied key paragraphs from that site and put the map as things changed. Kept grabbing a couple of them. There was the section about the pillboxes. It was the entire day. What happened that entire day was on that. That the battle began at 5:40 a.m. And what happened, protected by an intensive artillery screen, they were to advance 1.3 kilometers. Now, let's talk about kilometers for a moment. Because this is a story about an Australian, not an American, I am keeping the kilometer standard. However, if I wanted to do a conversion, this is one of those times where I would insert a footnote and do a kilometer to mile conversion so that those of us crazy people in America who think in miles will know what a 1.3 kilometer distance is. I wouldn't necessarily put it here. I'm not a fan. Let me show that bigger for you. I'm not a fan of doing it right there. I'd actually just have it down here. Why? Well, after an Australian sees me do that once, they're just going to keep reading as if nothing happened. But if you have an American reading your story and they see the first time you do a kilometer conversion, and then they will be looking for it the subsequent times you do the conversion. And it's just a nod to your reader and not annoying them. So that's what I would recommend there. Again, more details about what happened. Shane's going to get all of this that I put together. So now I wanted to focus on, remember I love to put in family context. Okay. Family context is very, very important to me. Who was left behind to grieve? Who was left behind to celebrate? Who could have attended an event and so forth? Now, Larry had a very big family. He had a lot of siblings, okay? And quite a few of the siblings were married and started families of their own. So I went ahead for Larry's family on the home front. Now, home front is a term that I know is used in America to talk about people like my grandmother who had a baby while her husband was serving in World War II. So that's a terminology that as an American I'm used to. I invite, since we're writing about an Australian, is that a terminology that you use, the home front? When do you call the people back home who aren't part of the battle? So if that is not how you would say it in Australia, or if you have a different phrase, then I invite you to use a different phrase. But I point this out because we can't always figure out our bias, but when you know that you're an American writer writing an Australian story, ask, "Hey, Shane from Australia, what do you call the home front? This is how I define the home front. What do you call it?" Um, and right now he says, "Yeah, home front is fine." But I wouldn't know if I didn't ask. So when you start adding a couple of the terms into your story, have somebody, especially if you're writing about somebody from a different country or a different culture, they don't have to be part of your family. Just they might know the language. It's like, "Hey, can you look to see if I have any American bias in this story?" And I think that's going to make your story so much better. Okay. All right. Let's go to how I was wrapping up. For Larry's family on the home front, William's letter was a mixed blessing. Now, we're writing the story. Can I make that judgment that it's a mixed blessing? Absolutely. I'm going to defend my position. And while I don't know if they really thought it a mixed blessing, I'm going to make the judgment that this letter that reached them was a mixed blessing. And here's why. And then if you want to debate it, I would love to hear it. Father Daniel Breasley and Mother Ellen Johnson, and I actually advise putting in their ages here. He was 46 and she was 40. It's how I remember it. Had closure and condolences from Larry's friend on the front line. They could share with Larry's siblings, and then I go forth and name the siblings: Albert, Arthur, Sidney, Margaret, Florence, Henry, Edith, Daniel, Evelyn, and Alfred. Whew. They could share all those names that he died seemingly an act of bravery. All right. So I made the judgment that it was a mixed blessing. I'm still trying to decide if I want to call it in an act of bravery to hop up there and look for the dead, or if it was an act of foolishness, or if I want to definitively claim that it was an act of bravery, or if I want to say in a seeming, like some people would seem it's an act of bravery. Thoughts that you have on whether you should call it a seemingly act of bravery, or if you would just say, no, that's an act of bravery to go forth and try to reclaim the dead and being shot during the service. Okay. But one thing I decided to do, I wanted to put the ages of Daniel and Ellen up here. But I thought if I made this list of ages in the story, I thought that would be visually distracting. So instead, I moved it down here to the footnotes. I'd actually have it be a different font entirely when I finally finished it. So I want it smaller. So in my final text, if I use a sans serif font, then the footnotes would be one with serif, and it would be a smaller size, just so we know that it's not exactly part of the story. It's just some extra feedback. But I was able to include the ages, so you know, like what ages were his siblings. I went ahead and put that there. I thought that was a good decision. Let me know what you think. Oh, you're right. I am wrong. He was, oh, shoot. You're right. Is Larry's siblings as old as his parents? No. That You're right. I think it was 64 and 4 and then 60 then, if I remember correctly. Thanks for that catch. That is what revising is for. All right. Now, Larry's siblings, some of them were married and they already had children. And at this point, we're still in the drafting phase and we can still decide, do we want to name the spouses and do we want to name the children who would later growing up hearing about Uncle Larry? I'm not sure. So because I'm not sure if I want to actually name them by name just yet, it depends. We have to keep revising the story and make that judgment, but it's something to consider. Instead, right now, I just said Larry's siblings could tell their children of Uncle Larry's story so that he was gone but not forgotten. A little cheesy, I know, but I liked it. If Jane and you guys don't like it, you don't have to include it. Now, I wanted to include who was he joining in death. He was joining an older sister and an older brother. But what I also saw when I was going through trying to figure out the ages about the siblings, I figured out that his most recent older brother, not his oldest brother, but the next older brother to him, he decided to enlist, or maybe I have that wrong and he was drafted. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it said he enlisted in the military in 1918. And then if that's the case, my guess is the family is now going to stress over whether Daniel is going to return or not. I also saw a note that Daniel didn't go earlier or with Larry because he was the sole provider for the family farm of 200 acres of wheat. And so then Larry was able to go. Now, where were the other siblings? Well, because some of these siblings were 40, 37, 33, and so forth, they're establishing their own households. And so that would make it sense why a 25-year-old at the time of Larry's death, 25-year-old Daniel, would then be the one to help his 60-year-old father with this farm. And so I thought it was really, really interesting that Daniel would then go serve the following years. So that would mean that Alfred would have been 17 and Evelyn 21 if she hadn't married and left the house yet. And so Daniel's willing to go. That's another story for another time period, but I definitely could validate that the family's going to be worried, would Daniel have the same fate? I wrapped it up temporarily right now with the total number of casualties who, from a population of fewer than 5 million, I just love this, 416,000 enlisted, 60,000 were killed. And then maybe if you're a math nerd, where's Greg when you need him? Math nerd, 5,000 were lost in this one day of battle that claimed the life of Larry. That's pretty profound. Not exactly sure how to state that just yet, but I went ahead and I put a link of where I found that sources so we can go back and cite them. All right, let me look at a few of the comments you guys have. Any questions you guys have so far? Let's see. Okay, remember I had the question about him being buried in the Ypres Memorial in Belgium. He's on the Mine Gate Memorial. They buried him behind the trench, but after the battle, there was no longer a grave. So it sounds like he's just part of that memorial. So you do want to offer a little bit of clarity. I didn't really go into the burial part of the story in the time that I was allotted because I do have to cut myself off. Otherwise, I'd probably write everybody's story and never write any of my own. But I didn't get to that just yet. Okay, he was court-martialed and jailed, but if has served the full sentence, then he would have been in combat. Great, great, great. No. Only because I'm an old dog and I don't wanna learn a new trick, not that it's superior. Let's see. Oh! This is a great question, and I would love to have feedback. I don't think we're going to have enough time in the live chat, but this is definitely a question for the replay audience or the live chat. After we finish, you then should be able to leave a comment in the comment section. You can answer this question. Which battles, wars are important for American national identity? So, Civil War, the Gettysburg, Antietam, and those are the 2 that are like right in the top of my mind. If we think about World War One, I couldn't necessarily tell you which battles. I mean, I'm not up on my World War history. The only one I can think of that are like big important ones is Pearl Harbor because we have a Pearl Harbor Day holiday. And I say holiday in quotes because you don't really celebrate it other than it's a federal holiday and some people get the day off. But yeah, that is a fantastic question. I would love to see what other people think. But for Civil War, Gettysburg, Antietam, Antietam because it was photographed and the devastation that was put in the newspapers changed people's opinions of the war. And so that's the one I'm thinking of. Oh, here's a great little, this is why you ask. Okay, so Anna Karin says that Swedish, we have an expression, that one, which is the same as home front. And so this is why you would share it with people who are familiar with the culture and the nationality of which your ancestor is from, so you can get some of these really cool terms. The other thing I would ask is when you're using a different language, put a pronunciation guide. Now, pronunciation guides, if you watched a video about pronunciation guides, this can use the dictionary style of telling people how to say things, or like we did with the Margaret Lally a few weeks back, Lally rhymes with Sally. Or with my ancestor Ithamer, I put a EYE, I, the, and mer, and broke it up that way because otherwise I thought it was ITH, if, or just telling you where the syllable breaks go could also help you know how to say things. All right. Okay. I like this. This is why you share your stories with others because Shane says the ANZACs, and I hope I'm saying the acronym correctly, are seen as an important part of national identity in Australia. But of course, that's not obvious across the pond here in the United States, possibly. And I mean, even in Sweden, did you, Anna, know that the ANZAC group is an important part of their identity? Maybe not. And so sharing your stories with others can help you know where you need to flesh out your story just a little bit more so that you don't assume everybody understands. Let me give you another example. I'm going to put this word on screen. Okay, I'm going to put it in chat and then put it on screen. Pueblos. What are pueblos? I'm going to give you a chance to try to answer that question, and I'm going to read a few more comments. But what are pueblos? And you guys are from all around the world. We've got Australia. I know that we have viewers from England. We've got someone from Sweden. We've got someone from Ohio. Where are you from? Cynthia, I don't remember where you're from. We got Kimberly's up from Colorado. She might actually know. Bob is from California. Okay, so I want you all to tell me right now, if you're watching live, tell me what a pueblo is. Okay. Okay. Oh, to go back to the question, while you guys are giving a moment to respond to that question, Shane's question was, which battles slash wars are important for American identity? And P. Smith said the Battle of the Bulge. And I did think of that one. That's the one that comes to mind. Storming of Normandy, would that be another? That's the one that comes to mind. I know we're going to Paris. Well, we're not actually going to stay in the city very much. We're going around Paris. We wanted to go to World War I and World War II sites in France, and I thought Normandy or the Norman beaches or something near France was one that I wanted to look at. Bob Bell says Pearl Harbor, Iwo Jima, Midday, and D-Day. There are more. Okay, perfect. You guys are awesome. Okie dokie. Now we're going to our question. Pueblos. Okay. So we have small town, villages or small towns, communities for Indigenous American Indians, a type of house in the South, but also maybe the name village instead of village for some Southern Native Americans. Okay. Yes. So growing up in Texas, when we talked about the Pueblo Indians, Pueblo meant the type of clay house that they lived in. When I moved to New Mexico, I apparently was offending some native New Mexicans by wondering, okay, where are the Pueblo houses? I keep seeing these signs for the Pueblos, and you keep saying, oh, the Pueblos live over there. I'm like, Pueblos live over there? What do you mean Pueblos live? Pueblos are houses. They're the clay houses, whatever. I soon learned, like many of you have figured out, communities for the Indigenous Americans, a house, right? You did pick up that was a house, but it also could be a small town. But the other thing I learned, it also refers to the type of people, particularly the ones who live around where I do in northern New Mexico. They are Pueblos. The people are Pueblos. And that blew my mind because that wasn't how I was taught in Texas. Now, you can dog on Texas education all you want, but I'm pointing this out that just like we go back to the comment to realize that ANZACs are an important part of Australian and New Zealand national identity, but to someone else, they may either A, not have been taught it. Meanwhile, our friend from Sweden, she's a historian, so she already knew it. So gold star for you. Either they weren't taught it, or they may have been taught either incorrectly or incompletely. And so it is really important when you're writing about your story, share it with somebody who is from if it's not the culture that you grew up in or the locality you grew up in, share it with somebody who's native from that area and get some feedback, right? And then if you have a chance, share it with somebody who's not from your region, because I remember when we talked on a writing deep dive before, we were talking about we talked about orphan trains, but we also talked about, I forget, the British, what was the program called? Where they took British orphan children and sent them over to Canada, and then there was a home involved. Home is in the name, but in any case, it's going to come to me right after the live stream. But before that live stream, I knew nothing about that. But then as I read the story, I could relate it to some other experiences I had, and I could ask more questions. Give me more details, because the person who was familiar with that English kind of a migration project of moving orphans over to Canada, they were familiar but by me asking questions to get more details, they overcame well, I thought it's in common knowledge bias that we sometimes have in our writing. So I highly recommend that you share with others across within the nationality and culture of what you're writing, and then outside so you can get more clarification on your story. Okay. Okie dokie. Um, I think we've covered all of the questions. If there are any questions you guys that are watching live have right now, pop them in. They don't have to necessarily be related. I do have to say that I asked Shane if I could work on his story just a little bit more. There were some really good resources that he had, but for some crazy reason, I wasn't able to look at them from his ancestry profile. They were those, the web links. There, you have the sources and then you have the web links. And he said somehow he linked it funky, and it just kept sending me in a loop. And so I'm going to spend a little more time because I just like this story a lot. Not that I don't like the others, but I really wanted to look at the different stories and practice implementing some of these into his story, and then turn it over to him to write a rough draft. Now, one of my requests is, if you are selected for a writing challenge, is to take the comments, take the suggestions that we have, and the resources we have. Give us the next stage of your draft or even your final draft. Share with us what you have. I'll make sure I put that over on the flagship Family History Fanatics website so others can see. And we just want to know, how did it go? What did you learn? Where is the story at now? So June, wink, wink, nudge, nudge for Mrs. Peace. If you have a final draft of that, we would love to have it. We know Margaret Lowley's story. I would love to have an update on that. And of course, the man who died in the snow in last week. So I would love to have an updated draft to see what the story is at. So you have some homework and to do, but I hope that you're learning a lot. If you have any other questions, suggestions, comments, or feedback for Shane or feedback for myself, put the link in the comments below. Let's have a discussion. Where should we have gone next? Is there something we should have included that I didn't think about? What other questions do you think Shane should ask in his story? Or how would you have written something so that it sounds pretty good? Thank you all for watching, and we will see you 10 a.m. Mountain every Thursday. We will have either a live stream or a pre-recorded video. Until next time. Bye, everyone.